the lesson from HS2 is actually when it comes particularly to new lines, you do need to be absolutely clear what you're building before you start. And I wouldn't have suggested we should start digging a hole in Manchester before we know exactly what we're going to build.
Andy Burnham has promised the biggest rebalancing ever away from London and the southeast to the Midlands and the north. He envisages a number 10 of the north based in Manchester to spearhead this ambition. But what would it mean in practice? The difficulties of regeneration through major infrastructure are illustrated by a new report by a powerful House of Commons committee on Northern Powerhouse Rail. It's a long-delayed plan to transform train links between Liverpool, Manchester and Leeds and create a kind of single, well-connected labour market in the process. If you read the report, it has all the hallmarks of another HS2-style fiasco. Indeed, HS2 people have been advising Northern Powerhouse Rail. So there you are. Let's speak to Henri Murison, Chief Executive of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. It's a business-led think tank promoting economic growth and investment in the north of England. Henri Murison, 12 years in the planning, this Northern Powerhouse Rail, not a mile of track laid. Looks like another shambles.
I mean, I would agree with you, Andrew, that it would be a much better situation if we'd got building it sooner. And I think the challenge in this country is sometimes the kind of chopping and changing of our political establishment does cause some delays to these projects. So various prime ministers have decided they wanted different things. We are now at the point where we've got plans for some of the early phases, a new station in Bradford, electrification of some of the existing lines in Yorkshire, and significant progress being made on planning for a new tunnel between Manchester Airport and Piccadilly, which are some of the key deliverables for the project. So I think the current government has done an admirable job at moving this forward, despite some of the kind of dither and delay of their predecessors. But I would agree with you that George Osborne first proposed this, we should have done much better.
In 2014, George Osborne, remember him, 2014. And then it was out to be a high speed. HS3, it was what it was going to be. It isn't that anymore. Public Accounts Committee says the scheme still lacks a proper design, scoping or costing after 12 years in the planning, and that the £45 billion budget is decoupled from reality. Even if it was to go ahead today, all systems go, it wouldn't have an impact until the 2040s. It's a shambles.
I think I do disagree with some of the points the Public Accounts Committee have made. And actually, the National Audit Office wrote the report earlier in the process. And I think that's a little bit more balanced, if I'm honest, and nuanced. Because although I would agree that we could and should start work as soon as possible, the lesson from HS2 is actually when it comes particularly to new lines, you do need to be absolutely clear what you're building before you start. And I wouldn't have suggested we should start digging a hole in Manchester before we know exactly what we're going to build. But I do think
after 14 years, I would hope you were clear. I mean, how long do you need?
Well, I mean, we lost 3 years with the cancellation of HS2. So that part of the elements of this project are bits that have been taken from what was originally part of HS2. So that has added some complexity. But you will have you will have people using electrified railway lines in a lot less than the 2040s in the next few years. And the current government is completing an existing upgrade of the line between Leeds and Manchester and York, there's something called the Trans-Pennine Route upgrade, it does include elements of Northern Powerhouse Rail are included within that. So I think the Public Accounts Committee, in order to make the headlines, Neil, I mean, it would be the first time that someone perhaps has made a particularly kind of evocative argument and making lots of comparisons with HS2, which of course is going to get the headlines, but doesn't necessarily resemble exactly what's going on the ground.
No. Right. But the importance of this line, of linking Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, was, and I've written about this myself and advocated the importance of it. It was the idea it would create a labour market, almost a connected conurbation across the north, from Yorkshire into Lancashire, which would be almost on a scale with Greater London, and that you would get all sorts of benefits from doing that. And that's why I think it is disappointing that it's taking so long to happen. So given that we're going to have to wait for that, maybe not to the 2040s, but certainly well into the next decade, what are the other big things that need to be done to redress the north-south balance?
I completely agree with you, Andrew. And I think, obviously, much more eminent figures than me, including my former chair, Lord Jim O'Neill, have made that argument very eloquently. And what Jim and others have also said, and I very much support them, is that there are other drivers of productivity. So we know, for example, that if we were to spend more of the government's growing innovation and science budget on translational science and on adoption of technology in the economy, rather than just on, how can I put it, kind of pure research, which is a kind of slightly kind of generic term, but basically discovery-led research only. Because in this country, we essentially subsidise science for the world, which is wonderful, but we don't commercialise anywhere near enough of it. And actually, the north of England has some real strengths. So the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre in Rotherham has driven up the productivity of what was the Orgreave Coking Works, which obviously was is famous for other reasons, for very, very difficult reasons. By 200% over the last 20 years, some of the biggest productivity growth in the north of England. And that has been achieved by science, investment from businesses like Boeing, the work of the University of Sheffield, but also of regional development agencies like Yorkshire Forward. And the person who was running Yorkshire Forward at the time, Tom Reardon, is now spearheading the government's Northern Growth Corridor and wider strategy, which is trying to replicate successes like that across the north of England. But I do think whether it's the energy transition, whether it's some of the new technologies and some of the industrial decarbonisation happening on the Humber, up in Teesside, there are other big plays which will also work beyond the cities, because there is a challenge, Andrew, which is that there are things that will drive the economies of those large city regions, like Greater Manchester, which has the fastest productivity growth of anywhere in the country. But you also need to think about what will work in places like the Humber, which have huge industrial capacity and capability, but are not cities and are not city-led economies in quite the same way. And we are working on both those challenges. How do you agglomerate across the cities with knowledge-intensive jobs, but how do you also do the big industrial and reindustrialisation challenge, which I think Andy Burnham rightly outlined on Monday, is a big opportunity for the country, because the fundamentals are that with all the geopolitical risks, which obviously you're very well aware of and have been just discussing on this programme, the UK has to not just pay its way and generate a fiscal surplus to be able to afford public services and be able to afford, for example, our defence commitments. But we also need to be able to produce, for example, steel. And the work that the government's doing at Scunthorpe to invest in the steelworks there is not just about the economy of Scunthorpe and creating local jobs, which it absolutely will do. It's also about sovereign capability and making sure that in our long-term future, we have a degree of independence, both for security, but also economically.
Oh, all right. Well, it's good that Andy Burnham has put all this back on the agenda and made it prominent. And let's see and monitor the results and come back and help us do that as the months go on. Henri Murison there from the Northern Powerhouse speaking to me there.